This one on December 19th. Charles Kalme. Call me on the line. Call me any time. Call me. Careless Kalme, or Charles Kalme. He was a Latvian-American chess master. He was a mathematician. He was born in Riga, Latvia on November 15th, 1939. And at the end of World War II, he and what was left of his family fled Latvia and lived for years in a refugee camp in Germany, but finally was able to come to the United States in 1951, Philadelphia to be specific. When he arrived, he won the United States Junior Chess Championship held at Lincoln, Nebraska. That was in 1955. His score was 9-1. He won the Pan American Intercollegiate Championship in 1957. And in 1960, I did mention this earlier, he was part of the United States team in the World Student Championship at Leningrad. Lombardi on board 1, Kalme on board 2, and Kalme won the gold medal for his board. As you'll recall, the team won the gold medal for the team portion, but each board was also eligible for an individual medal. Well, Lombardi won the gold on board 1, Kalme won the gold on board 2. He received his Ph.D. in mathematics from New York University in 1967 and became a professor of mathematics at Berkeley. When Latvia regained its freedom from the Soviet Union, Charles Kalme returned to his native land, where he died on March 20th, 2002. Bobby begins with e4 and e5 here. Knight f3, knight c6, no surprises, bishop b5, Ruy Lopez opening, and we have Morphy's defense with a6, the Columbus variation with bishop a4, knight f6, kingside castles, and Kalme goes with the closed Spanish, bishop e7. Rook e1, pawn b5 hits the bishop, bishop b3, kingside castles, pawn c3, pawn d6, and here pawn h3 is the Keres variation, named for Paul Keres, the Estonian champion. Knight a5, bishop c2, pawn c5, pawn d4 here, and we have Chigorin's defense, as we've seen many, many times in these Fischer games. Queen c7, queen's knight d2, knight c6, pawn takes the c-pawn, pawn takes the pawn, knight f1, bishop e6, knight e3, queen's rook to d8, queen e2, g6. The book move here is c4. Charles with g6 instead. Knight g5, bishop c8, undoing his development. Didn't like the idea of getting captured and having doubled isolated pawns in the center. a4, c4, a takes the b-man, and a takes the b-man. The eval bar ever so slightly above center. Oh, well, it settled back down as he gave it a moment to think. b3, b4, that's a mistake. It simply loses a pawn. The superior move is knight a5. Not only superior, but super attacking the b-man. However, b4 allows this pawn to be captured free for nothing, and that's what Bobby played. And now that makes knight to d5 a strong threat. h6 puts the question to this knight. I thought rook d6 might be necessary. Let's see what we get. Check mark. h6, however, gets a star, so that's a better move, apparently. Knight d5 is played nonetheless, hitting the queen. Knight takes the knight. Pawn takes the knight, hitting the knight. Super attack. Knight is pinned to the queen. So pawn takes knight, queen takes knight. You don't want to play pawn takes knight here, because then rook d6 wins the material back on a super attack. Queen takes the knight here. Queen takes the queen. Pawn takes the queen. Pawn takes the pawn on c3. Rook takes the pawn on e5. Bishop f6 hits this. Probably better, though, would have been to get this bishop back into the game and interpose with bishop e6. Now, that does lose this pawn to bishop takes pawn, and after bishop takes bishop, rook takes the bishop. But black would have some counterplay with rook d2. The bot still favoring white here, but better chances to hold for black. Instead, bishop f6 was played, hitting the rook, which flies over to the a5 square, doubling up with his colleague on the A file. King's rook to E8, not liked at all. Bishop F5 called for. Yeah, the idea of bishop F5 is to decoy this bishop away from covering the D1 square. The idea here is rook to D1 he wants to play. Can't play that with the bishop there. So that's why bot calls for bishop F5. Instead, rook fe8 was played, and Bobby with bishop takes pawn because it's under dual attack. Don't forget this rook is still controlling here. Bishop e3 is preferred. It accomplishes the same task. Part of the idea of this capture is to give the a1 rook a view of the first rank, so neither of these rooks can infiltrate here on the first. Well, the bishop's already covering the one square, but not the other. But you can play bishop e3 and still get this coverage, and also you have precluded this rook from coming because of the interposition, and of course this bishop also exerts his influence. Well, bishop takes the pawn was played, and the eval bar drops back to center. So that's how problematic the black rook's access to our back rank is, and even to our second rank is probably more to the point. Bishop takes the bishop, rook takes the bishop, and sure enough, rook d2 is the real issue here, isn't it? Rook c1 defends, and you're just not going to have time to do everything you want. He wishes for rook c5, but pigs on the 7th now. You've got a battery attack in both directions. Oh, what a beauty, though. Bishop takes g6. Double exclam for Bobby Fischer, ladles and jelly spoons. Pawn takes the bishop, and rook doesn't take pawn check. This is the pawn he's concerned about. Don't forget that when pawns enter into enemy territory, they go from being a 1-point pawn to a 2-point pawn to a 4-point pawn to a 6-point pawn to a 9-point pawn called a queen. So rook takes c3 is played. King h7 defends the g-man. b4 and these pass pawns become matters of concern for black. Rook e1 check. Yeah, I thought either rook b2 getting behind this pawn or rook takes pawn would have also been worth try. Let's see what those two moves get. A star there. How about this one? A check mark there. Rook e1 getting a star as well. King h2. Rook takes f2 here. Now pawn b5. These pawns are menaces. White is compensated for the bishop, and you probably want to get your rooks doubled here as well. That would be another nice thing. It adds defense here. Rook b2 getting behind this pawn. King g3. Yeah, maybe you could double your rooks on the 5th as well. Yeah, that gets a star. Anyway, king g3, king h6, and now he doubles his rooks on the 5th. Rook c5. Rook e3 check, king f4, rook e b3. Speaking of doubling rooks, rook gd5, and rook takes g2. Not sure exactly why that gets an inaccuracy. Rook d8. Yeah, okay, so king e5 comes with the idea of king d6, king c7, and so forth. Rook d8 was Fischer's choice. Bishop e6, that gets a question mark. Now king e5, bishop takes h3, rook h8 check, not liked. King g7, rook takes bishop. Oh my goodness. Another double exclam. So he goes ahead and takes that rook. You don't want to get tricky here and play rook e2 and just allow the king to do what it wants to do. You're just helping your opponent to move his passer up the board. So go ahead and accept the sacrifice, but that just shows you how valuable these pawns are here, guys. That Fischer would get rid of one of the defenders of c8, trading his rook for bishop, because that is a 4-point pawn, that's a 2-point pawn. Those two pawns together are worth more than a rook. And c7 is sure enough played. Rook h8. It gets a question mark. It's hard to see a problem with this move. After all, it does prevent promotion. Rook d5. And right, kd5 with the idea of kc6 and kb6. Again, same idea. That's what's being called for here. kc6 and kb7. But rook d5 was played instead. Rook e2 check. So rook e8 is being called for, but again, that's just going to be answered by king d6. It's, again, the same thing no matter what you play. Rook e2, king d6. It's the same thing. And, the pawns are getting more and more menacing as they get closer to promotion. Yeah, the fickle bot is sometimes hard to understand. King f6 here. Pawn b6, rook b2, rook b2. He wants to play rook e6 check. Oh, that's actually really slick. Right, this forces the draw because king c5 has to be played, and then rook h1, and you've got to draw. This rook puts up a wall here, and so this rook, the one on h1, can just come and harass the king all day long. So, for example, even though you can push b7, rook c1 check. And if you come to d4, I just keep giving you check. And there's not much you can do. It's going to be a repetition. If you get too far away, okay, you could try to get cute and say, hey, come play here and pick up my pawn. Well, no, instead I'll use this rook and force the king over, right? And then maybe should I just give check, or should I take the rook and let you queen? This is actually pretty tricky. This be hard to play. I don't know that I'd want to do that. The bot says, the eval bar says it's dead equal, but okay, what you do is you double your rooks and just keep them in check all day. That's the move. That's the move. You just keep them in check all day long. That is the way to do it. Okay, coming back. So, really shrewd move would have been rook e6 followed by rook h1. But instead, rook b2 was played, and that gets a big question mark, even though that is dead equal on the eval bar. So, how could it be a mistake? King c6 wanting to push his pawn. Rook c8 is a blunder. That is a blunder. King e6 is the way to hold the drawer. King e6. And the point is, he's going to decoy your king away from your rook. So you have to play, you could play rook d6. If rook d6, king e7, or you'd have to play rook c5. But with rook c8, that allows rook d8. An unfortunate blunder from Kalme. Rook c2 check, king b7, rook takes pawn check, pawn takes rook, and king f5. He promotes with check. That's taken, and oh, hey, that was actually, you don't want to play here. You don't want to take with the king. Look at the eval bar. Because g5. And this game will draw. He's going to have to give up his rook for the pawn. So that was a pretty slick and shrewd move there. You have to take with the rook. G5, king C6, G4, king D5, king F4, king D4, king F3, king D3, and he resigned the game. And, you know, you could continue with king F2, but now king E4, and after G3, instead of getting behind the pawn like you normally do because it's a protected pass pawn, instead you come down here and attack on the second rank. And no matter where you put your king, my king's coming to F3 or E3, depending on where you put it, I guess. If you play king F1, I play king E3, so that I set the stage for the checkmate. In other words, you can't come here because of checkmate. That's the idea. And so therefore you come here and now king F3, and it's the same thing. You can never come back or it's checkmate. So let's go over that real quick, just so you know. Instinct might tell you to play to F3 and take the opposition, but this is a rare exception because you want to squeeze the king. And so by putting up this barrier, you're basically preventing his king from coming to E1. And same thing, that wall just moves and he cannot come to F1. Yeah, it also wins eventually. Yeah, I'm not saying that, I'm just saying technique-wise, if you want to get the fastest win and your clock's ticking, tick, 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 learn this technique. Yeah, let me be clear. This isn't going to lose. It's not going to lose. It's just going to take you more time because you let him come over to E1, right? So it's just going to take you more time. This prevents king E1. Absolutely prevents it because that would be checkmate. So that's all I'm saying. So king G1 would be forced, and then the same thing, king H1 or G2. If you played G2, though, you're checked, you know, and it's just over. It's all over. You guys just don't play king here or here and stalemate, right? You know how to do this. Just back off. He has to come over. Boom. But yeah, king F3 there. You could have won with it. Let's go back to that one. Just going to take you an extra move. Extra 2 moves because he comes over here. And so you have to force him back. And then just move your rook somewhere along this line here. And then you get the position you ended up in anyway, right? It's the same thing. It's just different. Well, not there because you got to be able to checkmate him if he comes back. So in this direction. All right, so that's that game. I hope you learned something in that one. That was quite an interesting game because Kalme should have had the drawer.